Thanks for downloading Analysis. I'm Hugh Levinson, the editor, and this is the first in a new series. Now, for a long time I've really wanted to bag an appearance by the American writer Michael Pollan, and I'm delighted to say we've got him. I really think you'll enjoy the next half hour. Over to presenter Joe Fidgen.
Hello, welcome to the London School of Economics and Political Science and a special edition of Analysis. I'm Joe Fidgen, and the man who's drawn such a large crowd here tonight is Michael Pollan, one of the most influential writers about food and farming today. He's a professor of journalism at Berkeley in California and the author of several books that argue that we need to rethink our relationship with food for the sake of our health and for the well-being of every link in the food chain. Michael, one of the ideas that's made you famous is your 3 rules of eating. What are they?
Yeah, my 7-word mantra. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's what years of research has come down to. I was a little disappointed, in fact, that it was
it
so
sounds
simple.
Very simple, but
it isn't so simple.
simple.
I mean, eat food, what does that mean? Isn't it all food? Isn't everything in the grocery store food?
Well, let's talk about that, because you say actually that most of what we're eating is not, strictly speaking.
There has been a profusion in the last couple decades of products in the grocery store that should not be dignified with that label, food. And I call them instead edible food-like substances. And it's a very different thing.
Well, let's have a test. Yeah. I have a shopping bag here with 3 staple items. I've got a loaf of granary bread, sliced bread from the supermarket, and a low-fat gooseberry-flavoured yoghurt. Mm-hmm. And this is a multivitamin fruit drink.
Well, yogurt's a great example. Yogurt is something we think of as a healthy, wholesome food, and we give it to our kids in lieu of junky things. But in fact, today, yogurt very often has more sugar per ounce than Coca-Cola. People aren't aware of it because it often has these comforting claims on it, like low fat. And everybody assumes, well, fat's the evil nutrient. And if it has little of that, I'm golden. But in fact, fat is not an evil nutrient. We made a huge mistake demonizing fat for so many years, and that science is finally coming out. But when you take the fat out of something, it tends not to taste very good, so you add other things in. And in this case, you add a whole lot of different ingredients, including corn, pectin, and other kinds of thickeners to make it feel like it has fat in it. But the main thing that happens is you add a ton of sugar.
So is that food or is that an edible
food-like
substance?
So this has got like 1 foot in food and 1 foot in edible food-like substances. I mean, what is yogurt? Yogurt is fermented milk, maybe with a little bit of flavoring in it. This has so many other things in it that aren't yogurt. This is an edible food-like substance.
What about the bread?
Okay, bread, sort of like yogurt, began as a simple food. Everybody knew what it was. Your grandmother could identify it at 40 paces. And what is bread? Bread is flour, water, a little bit of salt, and yeast, or a starter culture. That's bread. Well, this has another 10 ingredients or so, including sugar.
But it's granary. That's got to be good for us, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's granary. It's whole grain, and that's a good thing in general. But the problem with these complex foods, that they always do have something good about them. But as soon as you see that one good quality, you give it a pass on everything else. And that's where the trouble begins.
How did it get that way? How have we come to be so disconnected from understanding what it is that we're eating?
Well, a couple things happen, I think, and they happen at the level of agriculture and they happen at the level of marketing and manufacturing. But basically, when we decided that we didn't want to prepare our own food and that we wanted corporations to do... I mean, think, what is cereal? It's porridge for people who are too busy, right? I mean, you just pour milk over it rather than making hot cereal. And then cereal, which is a great convenience, even that became too time-consuming for people. So now we move to these cereal bars that you can take on the school bus or eat in the car. So it's our desire for convenience that's driven this in part. But it's also a supply-driven phenomenon because it's very hard to make money selling simple food. You make money selling food as processed as much as you possibly can process it. And the reason is that it's a great business model. You start with these really cheap raw ingredients. Most of the food in the supermarket is corn, soy, or wheat that has been broken down and reassembled in the form of all these processed foods. And those ingredients are very cheap. So a box of cereal might have 5 cents worth of grain in it, and then some ingenuity and patented shapes and flavors, And it sells for, what, 3 or 4 pounds?
Just a word about this. Is this safe to drink?
This is a multivitamin fruit drink. Okay, so this has got a bunch of vitamins in it. B vitamins to help energy release, vitamin C to support your immune system, and it's one of your 5-a-day portions of fruit. I think this is a very deceptive product. I mean, this is being sold to you as health in a bottle. But again, it's full of sugar. I mean, the whole category of energy drinks and vitamin drinks, these are definitely edible food-like substances, not foods.
Everything you say about the difficulties of producing food cheaply and so on, convenience, that have led us to this point where we're eating things which are borderline food in your description. Does any of it matter? I mean, food is fuel when it comes down to it, isn't it? You know, you eat it, you feel full, you stop.
Food is not fuel. Food is fuel if you're an animal. If you're a human, food is a lot more interesting than that. Food is community, communion. I mean, it's a very important part of our social life. We eat together as a species. I mean, very few species do that. Food is the way we construct our identity. You know, we're the people who don't eat pork, or we're the people who avoid gluten.
And this isn't a modern thing. I mean, you think this stretches way back to the dawn of time when we became modern humans.
Yeah, well, the invention of cooking is really what did make us human. And this happens a very long time ago, about 2 million years ago. Before that, we were like all the other animals. We ate food as we found it. It's been a mystery in anthropology and archaeology. Why at a certain point in ancient history did our brains get so much bigger than the other primates, more or less our size, and at the same time our gut, our digestive apparatus shrank? When you cook food, a lot more nutrition is available to you. You have begun the digestive process essentially outside of the body. The fire starts breaking down the proteins, and not to mention make it taste a lot better because all these chemical reactions take place that make it incredibly more appealing. But you don't have to use as much of your energy to break it down in your body. And that's why animals have these very long intestines and things, because they're eating this raw food that has to be very slowly and painstakingly broken down. Once you begin eating cooked food and your gut starts to shrink since it's not necessary, and your brain gets bigger because you have all this energy, your brain consumes about 20% of your energy, even though it's only 2% of your body weight. So we're now dependent on cooked food.
The problem we've got as humans is that we can eat just about everything.
We're omnivores.
Yeah. And
it's a problem and it's a blessing.
And it's a problem because we need to know what's safe to eat and what are good combinations to eat and all the rest of it. And the information about what is good to eat is passed down in rituals and taboos and manners, recipes, culinary traditions.
Yes, omnivory allows us to live everywhere. I mean, we've done very well on what nature has to offer in 6 of the 7 continents. And that's because our bodies can make a healthy diet out of a great many things. But if you're an omnivore, you're trying everything, and there are things out there that can kill you or make you sick. And so you need a culture to remember what those are. And animals do have that primitive culture. You know, rats convey to one another what's healthy to eat. And this is why it's so hard to poison rats. They'll take a tiny little bite, and they'll wait a half hour to see if anything happens. And if nothing happens, and they feel okay, they'll go over to the other rats they live with, and they'll breathe on them, saying, that's okay, you can eat anything that smells like that. And they pass that on. So we've been navigating the complexity of food long before the modern supermarket. I argue that it's just gotten even harder. We face a kind of wilderness of strange things in the supermarket. And you asked earlier, why does it matter? Another reason it matters is that we have a huge public health problem related to food. And it's connected to these kind of products, which is to say we have very high rates of obesity and overweight and type 2 diabetes, a completely preventable disease linked to diet.
To the Western diet.
Which is to say to a diet with lots of refined carbohydrates, sugars in it. And there are other factors that contribute. There have been radical changes to public health since we moved to this diet of highly processed food. And now we have easy access to things that our species evolved to work really hard to get, and sugar is a key one. Sugar in nature is very hard to find.
But you're not suggesting we go back to sort of hunter-gatherer lifestyle.
No, we're not going to go back.
So how are we going to deal with obesity, for example?
Well, there's a lot we can do to help with the problem. I mean, one is we need to do something about deceptive marketing of food, especially to children. I think we have to rejigger our agricultural subsidies, so we're not supporting all that corn, soy, and wheat, and we're supporting healthier foods like vegetables and fruits, which we don't. We do very little to support them. in the marketplace, with the result that real, simple fruits and vegetables are very expensive relative to sugary foods. So I think that there's work to be done there. I think that the collapse of cooking has really contributed to these problems. In researching my last book, I found all this very interesting research that correlates home-cooked food with people having a healthier diet and lower weight. You know, if you cook, you also have family meals, and family meals have very positive impacts on children. It's where we teach our kids to take turns, to share, to argue without fighting. I mean, all those things happen when you sit down to eat together, and they don't happen when everyone's eating alone in front of a screen.
But home-cooked food doesn't just appear out of nowhere. I mean, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, as you've pointed out.
Well, it takes less money than processed food. If you're willing to do some work cooking, you can eat very economically because raw ingredients cost less than processed ingredients.
Who's going to do the cooking? I mean, we've been fighting to get out of the kitchen for 50 years. Do you want us back?
I want everybody back. One of the problems with cooking is that it became a female ghetto. And when the feminist revolution came along, there was enormous pressure on all kinds of work that happens at home: childcare, cleaning, cooking. And this very difficult conversation began between men and women. There was an effort to renegotiate the division of labor in the home. And before we could finish that conversation, the fast food industry stepped forward and said, "Don't worry about it. We've got it covered. We'll do it for you." They removed the tension on both sides. And the moment where this happens in the United States, where it's really visible, is Kentucky Fried Chicken takes out this advertising campaign, billboards across the country, giant bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken on a white background with 2 words, women's liberation. So they aligned themselves and their agenda with the aspirations of women. And it was remarkably successful. But it's important to understand that the drive toward processed food was largely supply-driven, not demand-driven. It took a long time. They were knocking on the door of our kitchen for decades before we let them in. And yeah, processed food let men off the hook, and it let women off the hook. And it seemed very enlightened at the time, as that ad suggests. And maybe you think that that's a good deal and a fair bargain, and that's fine, but we still have to reckon the price of it. And the price is a much less healthy population. And the answer is not to get women back in the kitchen. It's to get husbands as well and kids. And it's really important to get kids in the kitchen.
And you clearly love cooking. But I wonder, as a well-to-do Berkeley professor with the time and the inclination to make wonderful meals every evening, I mean, there are plenty of people who don't have the time or the inclination, or who like junk food, or who want to be spending their time doing something other than cooking, like reading or watching television programs about cookery. But that is their choice, isn't it?
Well, it is their choice, absolutely. And I'm loath to tell people what to do. What I do as a writer is to tell people the information they need to make good decisions. And, you know, there's another story being told by the food industry. And that story is that you can have everything, and you can have convenience and health. And please do watch those cooking shows on television. We want you to. And that strikes me as a very interesting phenomenon, that we're interested enough in cooking to watch TV shows about it, but not sufficiently interested to actually do it. And I think that's really bizarre.
It's not possible, is it, to look at this debate in a British context without considering it in the class system? And
anywhere. There is enormous class implications.
And some of your critics accuse you of extolling an elitist club for foodies. You know, some kind of middle-class utopia that you're describing.
There's no question that we have a long way to go in democratizing really fine food. Organic food, for example, sustainably grown meat. It is more expensive. And what are we going to do about that? Is the goal to drive the price of that food down? No, the answer is, I think, to first begin paying the real cost of food, which is more than we're paying now. In other words...
But many can't afford to do
well,
this. This is the
point. Let me finish the point. You're right. Because cheap food is now baked into our economy. We have many people dependent on cheap food. Since the 1970s in the United States, real income, adjusted for inflation, has fallen consistently to today. The only reason people put up